G'day everyone, thought I'd continue with the tests that I'm doing. Hope you're enjoying these. I'm really having fun doing them actually. And I thought I'd do a number of these while I've still got the 105, the Sigma 105 millimeter on loan from CR Kennedy. So thanks CR Kennedy for lending me this lens. I'll be looking at the 135 next, so I'm looking forward to comparing that to the Sony particularly. But I thought what I'd go through with this exercise is seeing how the bokeh looks with both lenses wide open, and then I was going to stop down one or to the point where I thought that the bokeh looked nicer and more rounded, because they have the typical look when they're wide open of going more towards that lemony shape or football shape. And I thought I'd sort of talk about stopping them down seems to make all the difference, just that one stop. So let's have a look at it, and then obviously in the comment box you can let me know what you think. But what I've done is I've used both lenses. I've tried to match the same distance between the subject, obviously in the background, and to just get the bokeh balls a similar size. It's a bit hard because I'm working in a tight space, but it'll give you an idea anyway about what the bokeh balls look like straight wide open, and then just stop down one stop. So let's have a look at the results that I'm getting. Okay, so let's have a look at the shoot itself. And I wanted to shoot these wide open. And that's the thing with this. I'm going to show you both the differences between, say, the Sigma and also the Sony, and even how they stop down. But let's have a look at this first, and we'll compare how the images all look the same. You'll notice the closer they are to the center, the rounder the bokeh actually is. And that's the case in both of these portraits and landscape shots. So that's really quite interesting when you look at that. The further they get out, the more lemony they start to go, or sort of football-y that they start to go in shape. Now, that doesn't bother me at all, and I would quite willingly give this to a client, but I know some of you out there are really picky that you want the bokeh to be perfectly round, and that's a personal thing. It doesn't bother me at all, and I'd happily submit this to any client, and I've never ever had a client that complains about the bokeh shape, but that's something that photographers tend to do. So that's looking at it like that. If you're looking at it, that's wide open. Now, if I did want to, say, step that down, before I do that, I'll show you how the Sigma looks the same way. So let me open up. So let's have a look at the Sigma wide open. Again, you can see that the bokeh balls closest to the center here are reasonably round, and as they go further out, they tend to go to that football shape. So that's what's happening there. So it's basically giving the same problem as what the Sony is if you are after that perfect shape. But I do think that the Sigma bokeh tends to look more uniform overall compared to the Sony. Now, I'd love to know your comments down below what you think about this, but I am sort of thinking, looking at it, that the Sigma is rounder overall if you're looking at it. Well, we'll go the opposite way now and check portrait shape, and let's see what that does. So that's 1.8, and let's open up the Sigma 1.8. Both wide open. Again, it's showing the same thing. Closest to the center is showing the round bokeh balls, and as you go out to the side, they become a little bit more sort of lemony shape. Again, I think the Sigma tends to look a little bit rounder overall than what the Sony does at 2.8. Now, I've noticed that does change though as you step up, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So let's now try, I'm going to go back to the original Sony wide open, and I'll show you what happens when you take this to f2.8. You can see here what happens if I go from the f1.8, which is wide open in the Sony, to f2.8. So I've stopped down one stop. And you can see here that it basically has become uniform all the way through. There are ones that are sort of chopped off a bit, but that's the lighting, I think, because it's lights on top of lights and it's having that effect. But overall, it's very, very nice and round the second that you've gone to f2.8. And I looked at the test with the Sony, and the Sony seems to be constant then right the way through, that the bokeh balls do stay really quite nice and round, and lovely, in fact, if you're after that round shape. So just stopping down one stop makes a massive difference if you're dealing with the Sony itself. Now let's have a look at the Sigma at 1.8. So it's stopped down one. And you can see again, there's even an improvement here. So stopping down 1 on the Sigma from f1.4 to 1.8 has also made a big difference as well in how the bokeh looks, in the shape that you're actually getting. And it is much more rounder in that regard. If we check the... let me just move this over here. If I bring up the Sigma, which I think is that one, is it? Yeah, that's the Sigma 1.4. And if we look at the Sigma at 1.8, again, you can see here that the aperture is much rounder by stepping down 1. So it looks like both lenses tend to have the same characteristic overall, which is really quite interesting. Now, let me open up both of these images at step down 1. So that's the 135 at f2.8. And that's the 105 at 1.8, so both step down 1 full stop, and you can see that they both are consistently round. The only other thing that I did notice was that I did one test a little bit higher, and I might try and post that a little bit later, where if you started to go up any further on the Sigma, that you started to get more of that sort of hexagon shape on the edges, so you could start to see the aperture blades, but only after it was stepped down quite a bit. If you're dealing with just closing the aperture by 1, both of these lenses have really quite nice round bokeh, and I think they're both really good. And I'd use either of these wide open, but I do think that the Sigma had a slight edge wide open in having round, consistent bokeh all the way through. I'd love to know your opinion about that, but I just thought it was interesting to look at. It's great to just do these initial tests early on. I'm just going to open up the wide open ones again, just so I can sort of get you to look at both of these two wide open to see what you think about the characteristics of both of the bokeh on these lenses. So let me know what you think down below. I'd love to know your opinion. And any other tests that you'd like me to do. I've got the Sigma for another week, the 105, before I get the 135. So let me know any other tests that you'd like me to actually do. But overall, very impressed with both lenses, really.